Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. I'm Jason Wehrli with Wehrli Custom Fab, and here's something that we get a lot of questions about and we don't talk much about. So I figured we'd do a video about some of our personal pulling trucks here at WCFab. What we have behind us is one of my personal trucks that we built going on 8 years ago now. We pull with a local organization called Illini State Pullers, all across northern Illinois. A couple years back, we had some class changes a little bit. We used to pull with gas versus diesel in a combination class, 2.6 turbo. A few years ago, we came together as an organization and all the diesel guys in that class, and we developed essentially a 3-inch class that's very similar to what you see at a national level at a PPL style hook. First and foremost, the wheelbase. PPL level, you're running 158-inch. ISP, we run 137-inch, so that's your typical standard cab, 8-foot bed style pickup truck. We run a single rear tire DOT instead of dual DOTs, and most notably, we're running at 6,500 pounds max weight versus 8,000 pounds max weight. Otherwise, it's all the same. One thing I do want to show, though, that we haven't talked about much before is the power plant in these trucks. So obviously, we're big Duramax guys here at WCFab. We run this truck, and then we've also got our 2002 LB7 shop truck, which is actually running a L5P NV4500 combination setup. We'll talk about that truck in a different video. 3.0 class is the most popular class across the country for diesel truck pulling. And what we run in this truck right behind us here, we won 2 championships with last year, and we've been really dialing in over the last 2.5 seasons. If you have a 3.0 pulling truck or you're interested in building a 3.0 pulling truck, we are more than capable of putting together a turnkey package, whether it be a complete build from the chassis all the way through or just a complete power plant, dynoed, ready to drop in and go. This combination has been tried and true and tested numerous times over and over, and we've got it really well dialed in. So for this particular application, we're still sticking with the LBZ LML combination base, though we do have an L5P in the works for this setup as well that we're going to be dyno testing next winter. We put a lot of pride in being able to put together a reliable and repeatable package for truck pullers. One of the biggest issues you'll see out there with a lot of guys that are new to truck pulling is being able to keep their stuff running and keep it going to the next hook and throughout the whole season. Some of these events, you might do 3 or 4, sometimes 5 or 6 events in a week. And most importantly, you need to be able to make every event in a points race or in a championship race. We're pretty proud to say that this combination here has over 60 passes on the track, in the truck, and it's got over 60 dyno passes. So there's 120 passes on this combination, and it's going back in the truck for another season. We've got excellent compression, standard amount of blow-by, and the thing just runs like a top. We just got back from the dyno a week ago, put another 10 passes on it, trying some new injectors and different combinations of parts, picking up a little bit more power. Just a really reliable setup that you can focus on your chassis and dialing in your clutch, gearing, tire pressure, all the other important things that makes a pulling truck go out there and win an event, and not worry so much about trying to keep an engine running or having to have a big list of maintenance items. Aside from changing the oil on this engine, adjusting the valves once a year, it's pretty much the only maintenance we've done. After the 60 passes, we pulled the heads off just to have them checked out. Looking awesome, great condition. Went through, had a valve job done just to make sure they're fresh. Obviously, these engines deal with a lot of high EGTs, and the valve train, guide seals, and the valve job in particular goes through the most abuse on these engines. But otherwise, it's what I would like to say is a winning combination that's reliable and repeatable. When I put this truck together, I wanted a setup that was easy to take in and out of the truck without having to dismantle the whole thing. As I mentioned, this just came from the dyno, and without having to completely take apart all your components, your turbo, your intercooler, your piping, exhaust, you don't have to do that. The way this setup is, it's a modular piece where it's ready to get the bell housing put back on it and essentially be dropped right back in the chassis and go pulling. We were able to do that by way of our engine mounting system, so we'll start there. Most clubs have a rule where the front of your engine block can be in relation to the center line of your axle. And in most cases, that number is about 6 or 7 inches further forward than where a Duramax typically sits in an OEM chassis. So if you're looking for the most competitive edge, or if you're building a truck from the ground up, you're going to get that engine moved forward in the chassis to that limit. So what we use is a front engine mount plate and then our billet rear engine cover. They all have mounting points incorporated into them so that you're not using the center mount of the engine block anymore and putting stress on the center of the engine and causing any flex or movement in that area. We're mounting to the very front of the engine block off of mounting tabs, and we're mounting to the rear cover of the engine. So that, again, takes stress away from the center of the engine block, and it helps tie together that whole component and gets rid of the drivetrain or anything behind it needing to position that engine. The engine is solid and in place with those two engine mounts, front and rear, and the rest of your drivetrain is separate. Whereas sticking with just a conventional center mount, your engine will typically rotate and rock on those unless you have a mid plate at the transmission. We have the billet front mounting plate and our billet rear cover. Those are all available, obviously, for purchase if you're looking at mounting a Duramax into a pulling truck chassis. Our billet rear cover, it's a little different than most out there. When we designed our billet rear engine cover, we had a couple things in mind that we wanted to improve on over the factory cover. Factory cover, first and foremost, it's meant for an Allison bolt pattern. Whether you go for Pro-Bel or Brow or whatever brand it might be, you're typically going to deal with a big block Chevy bolt pattern, which the upper half of an Allison matches, but the lower half is different. So if you're running a factory rear engine cover, you're only able to use about 6 or 7 bolts. The whole bottom is not connected. It usually ends up leading to breaking the rear cover, and it's not a safe way to go about it. If you're going to do it right, you want to use a billet rear engine cover. So our billet rear engine cover incorporates all of the big block Chevy mounting pattern bolts and allows you to use those full circle all the way around for a complete 360-degree protection and connection of your blow-proof bell housing to the rear engine. In addition, the factory cover being cast aluminum, they're notorious for cracking and breaking. They've got a lot of cavities in them for coolant and for oil. On these competition engines, we're full fill cement up to the deck surface. So the engine block itself has no coolant running through it. So the rear cover, we eliminate all coolant passage and all oil passages, so it creates a solid, much stronger component for connecting the rear of the engine to the engine block and to the chassis. So those are two main benefits with the billet rear engine cover. All of your bell housing bolts, solid, no coolant or oil passages. We've incorporated 2 mounting holes on both sides of that rear cover to mount the engine into the chassis. Another important feature that gets overlooked on a performance Duramax engine is when you add a girdle to the bed plate of the engine, which you're always going to do when you're building a performance Duramax. It takes that upper crankcase pan and drops it anywhere between 3/8 and 5/8 of an inch, depending on what brand girdle you're using. And when you do that, you lose your connection of the rear cover to that upper crankcase pan because you lowered that pan down. So what we've done with our rear cover is we've lowered the holes, the mounting holes, and slotted them so our rear cover allows the use of the OEM bolts into the upper crankcase pan. So several important features on that rear engine adapter plate for truck pulling applications. So the billet front engine cover came about 8 or 9 years ago now. We were trying to run multiple CP3s on these trucks several years ago, and we were trying to belt drive, we were trying to cog drive, and just constant battles and issues. A CP3 pump, especially a modified CP3 pump, can consume upwards of 30, even as much as 40 horsepower to drive, say, a 10 or 12 millimeter stroker CP3 pump. And when you're trying to do that on a serpentine belt or even a cog belt, it can be problematic, and you're dealing with flex and pulley slippage. So we came up with this idea many years ago of using reverse rotation CP3s and mounting them backwards from your conventional location in the valley, turning them around 180 degrees, meaning reverse drive, and using that front engine cover. So we came up with our first front engine cover back in 2014, I think it was, and back then there wasn't a lot of reliable stroker pumps around, and we were doing it because we were trying to run 3 pumps because we needed 3 pumps in order to have that fuel capacity at the time. Now, obviously, today we've got a lot more reliable options from Exergy on the stroker CP3 pumps, and you don't necessarily need to have 3 in most cases. So our billet front engine cover, tried and true. We've been running it in our customers' trucks and our personal trucks for going on 10 years now. and it's a really slick combination of components for you dedicated die-hard truck pullers. And I say dedicated die-hard truck pullers because this front cover application does not allow the use of a OEM style water pump. Again, these engines are typically concrete filled. You're either running a solid head with no water, or if you're still running a factory head, you'll have water flow just through the heads. So we eliminate the OEM style water pump, and we drive, the cover comes with the availability to drive up to 3 CP3 pumps off the front around that cam gear. What we do on our applications with the 3-inch turbo, 2 10mm CP3s or 2 12s is enough fuel to supply the 3-inch horsepower levels. And we actually use that third location to drive our low pressure Waterman lift pump, which is a mechanical pump that's supplying fuel to the high pressure CP3s. So obviously anyone that's been in diesel performance for a long time, you're familiar with a low pressure lift pump. It's a common upgrade on Duramaxes starting in 2001. When you get into the pulling truck applications, it's nice to simplify things as much as possible, and in our opinion, getting away from anything that's an accessory electronic is one less fuse you got to worry about blowing, or one less electric motor you have to worry about operating that could completely ruin the whole combination. So we're a big fan of running mechanical fuel pumps. We've had great luck with the Waterman series pumps, and we drive that right off of the CP3 port. This low pressure pump flowing through the WCFab billet fuel filter housing is essentially sucking fuel from the fuel cell out of the weight box typically. And on the outlet of our billet fuel filter housing, we've got multiple outlet ports to feed up to 3 CP3s. So you've got one inline feed, those pumps producing, we usually limit them to around 40-45 PSI of low pressure side lift pump, and then multiple lines coming out of that housing to feed each pump individually. So these billet front covers, again, it's a very simple setup and very problem-free. We've ran this exact setup, like I said, for going on 10 years, and we've seen little to no issues. We like to run a third high-pressure fuel rail, A, for volume, and B, it allows you to feed all your pumps to one main common rail, and then that rail splits off to feed your left and right bank. Instead of feeding one pump to each right and left bank of the engine and then tying it together, we have that third rail for capacity and more equal flow to each side of the engine. So that wraps up our first segment of this video. Obviously there's a lot to talk about, a lot more detail we can go into. Feel free to leave a comment, ask any questions, reach out to us. We love talking truck pulling. So if you got questions, feel free to hit us up. Stay tuned, we'll do another segment here about the intake and exhaust side. We'll talk about exhaust plumbing options, turbo mounting options, our custom air-to-water intercoolers, and why we build those the way we do, and our nice billet fabricated intake manifolds. Thanks a lot for tuning in. I'm Jason Wehrli.